Good afternoon. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Friday, July 21st, 2023. Beautiful day here in Minnesota. It's cooled off, but we're expecting the heat wave to continue. So the weather's important wherever we are. I was listening to a show on public radio about one of the Minnesota, I think, meteorologists who focused on the dangers of heat. And one of the things I took away from that interview was that we uh, don't really recognize that as many or more fatalities occur from heat than any other weather phenomena. The excitement we get in the news is when a hurricane happens or tornado. And those are obviously traumatic and devastating events, but over the long haul, this reporter was saying that the damage that uh, not being prepared to handle heat and the consequences of heat have the most impact. So something to think about. Well, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining the program. I want to, as always, invite you to help us grow this. We've crossed 400, heading to 500 short time. It'd be great to get 500 in the next day or so that we need about maybe 90 people to subscribe to our show. How do you do that? Go to YouTube, Insight News MN, and you get a choice of liking, subscribing, or sharing. So subscribe and like and share. And I'm asking your help in making sure that you are one of our subscribers, but also that you reach out to 4 or 5 or 9 or 10 of your friends, people that ought to be involved in this conversation, and ask them to become a subscriber. If we hit the 500, we'll speed up, accelerate our energy to get to 1,000. And we also want to get to where we, over the course of a year, have achieved 3,000 viewing hours, meaning people come and they stay, they get involved in the conversation. So, what we have to do, I think, is provide good conversations, and we'll do that today. We try to do it every day, but we appreciate the opportunity to have you be part of the conversation as well. Uh, Also, wherever you are, send us a note. Drop a note in the comment section. Tell us your name and tell us where you're watching from, and let us know if you have comments on the topic of the day, if you have suggestions for comments in the future, and if you want to be participant in the actual live discussion. Let us know. We're interested in that. As I've said, we are streaming not only on the YouTube Insight News channel, but also on the YouTube channel of Black Press USA, which is the National Newspaper Publishers Association. We're streaming on the Facebook pages for both Insight News and National Newspaper Publishers Association, as well as Al McFarlane Facebook page. And we're streaming on LinkedIn and on Twitter. We've got, I think, 5,000 or so followers or connections on LinkedIn, and I think the same number on Facebook. Our goal now is to convert all of those contacts, those relationships, to subscribers for the conversation with Insight with Al McFarlane. So if you're in that number, join us and let's make it happen. Before we go on, I want to remind you that our friends over at the Minnesota Department of Health and our team are both invite you to pay attention to COVID-19. We're still concerned that COVID is real, and we want you to know that we want you to look at getting vaccinated. There's a free clinic coming up, for example, in Brooklyn Center. It's at the CAPI IOC office or campus. It's like it's 5930 Brooklyn Boulevard in Brooklyn Center. And there's one coming up in August, one in September, and more. We'll keep letting you know when these free vaccination events or clinics come up. Want to invite you, remind you to get vaccinated and to stay healthy. Well, actually, the next one coming up is July 27th, so that'll be great. So here we go. Today, we've got a great program for you, a great discussion, and the theme today is um, how do we uh, uh, deal with the complexity, cultural complexity of navigating identity in our relationships? How do African American couples, for example, navigate the complexity of identity in our family or couple relationships? So, some of the questions I want to discuss with my colleagues today include broadly, what's the socio-political climate in America? In what ways has the climate impacted the mental health and relationship dynamics for African American couples? And how can therapists effectively explore and incorporate these external factors, so social factors, in therapy sessions? Why is that important? Well, today, for example, I do therapy every Friday morning, and this morning, that's what it's all about, is trying to help us understand how we get balance and how we examine our activity and our intention, and how we show up both authentic and true to ourselves and for each other in the community, in our families, and in the world. And so, that leads to another question: how do Black couples navigate what's referred to as the duality of their cultural identity? And how does that influence the relationship? And what do you mean? So we are in our own African American cultural world, but we also uh, navigate in a society that I've heard described as a social structure, which is how the overall national culture is organized. And we're within that. And so we have to code switch, right? And how does code switching work for both the individual, but what does it do when we relate to each other? What's the difference? Do those tools and processes come in conflict in our personal relationships? And and then the third question that I want to talk about over the course of this hour is, are there barriers or misconceptions that exist in our community among us that keep us from getting therapy? And what do we do? Should we be working to remove any kind of barriers? And should we be promoting open dialogue about the benefits of therapy, and particularly of couples therapy? So it's a lot to unpack, a lot to go into. Interested in your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences on it. And when you think about this conversation, I do want you to drop a note in the comments section and let us know how you feel. Let me say hello, first of all, to Michelle Madison. Michelle, thank you as always for being here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our program today. I think Dr. B is here and ready, and also Dr. Oliver Williams is here and ready. Let me bring you both in. Dr.
Get
B.
me in the show.
Oh, there she is. Okay. And Dr. Williams, how are you?
I'm good, brother.
Good,
Good to
good, good.
see you.
Well, I set out some expectations for this show, a deep topic, and I think I'm in the right company, people with the right answers. So this is going to be a great conversation. And as always, I place myself at the feet of the masters to learn and to be curious and to help uh, train, change this conversation of three, sharing with the audience of thousands. That's our intent. Dr. B, we begin, as always, on the Healing Circle with the protocol. I'm going to pass the talking stick to you and the microphone to you to set in motion our conversation today.
I'm happy to be here, and happy Friday, everyone. I'm glad we're here to be able to join again in the circle. And I'd like to just explain why we do it and why we engage in this ritual. The first reason is that when we come as an African people and we go in a circle, the circle is symbolic of the sharing of power and voice. Everyone in the circle has equal access to power, and that is the center of the circle. We also see that in that circle, there's no hierarchy as who's better or who's worse, who can't speak and who cannot. Who can. And so in that sharing of power, we acknowledge our elders who give us voice and the shoulders on which we stand. And in addition to acknowledging and honoring our elders, We also honor our elders because they're closest to our ancestors. And we honor our ancestors because they're closest to the Creator. So, in this space where there's sacred nature, sacred connection, sacred love among us, we grow and heal. We also understand in our circle that it should be an orderly exchange of ideas and information and sharing of voice. So, in the circle, we use a virtual talking stick. Although we don't have this talking stick physically with us, we see that it is virtual, and we move the conversation by passing the stick one person to another. So that is what we do today in the talking stick. I mean, with the talking stick and in the healing circle. I pass the mic to you, Brother Al.
Thank you. Well, before we begin on the questions that I mentioned, I want to take a point of personal privilege, Dr. B, to thank you and Brother Yelly and the team at Brakens and the Institute uh, uh, for ACWI, African American Child Wellness Institute, for the personal support you all provided to me and my family when we celebrated the transitioning of my mom from this plane into the plane of the ancestors. And I personally thank you for the words of encouragement, of inspiration, of direction, of celebration. And I thank you and Brother Yelly for alerting and connecting all of our family and friends from the Yoruba community. And we, I think, created a stronger, a more widened relationship between the McFarlanes, the sons of a Yoruba woman, and the Yoruba community here. And so thank you so much for that. Thank you for the wonderful and powerful drumming that the Yoruba drummers did to lead our procession into our celebration over at the Estes Chapel. And so just heartfelt thanks, gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. Thank you so much. Well, then let me go ahead and go into the topic today. And Dr. Oliver, let me have you start us off, because I want to talk about, as always, we're talking about our whole body health and mental health in particular, and about couples, African-American couples. And are we in a unique and peculiar situation as Black people with the dynamic of the condition of our presence here, the nature of our presence here, and its evolution, and then a society who has espoused some values for humanity and individuals that they've also at the same time uh, suppressed and denied ours. How do we operate as couples within that dynamic? And as I say that, I'm thinking about, how could you be a man and a woman, a family, a couple, when you were owned and when the owners thought they had, and in fact did have, the power to deny you life, work, access to each other, access to your responsibility to each other and to your children? They could sell you. And so we come out of a history where we also know that after they stopped importing uh, enslaved Africans, they went into the business of animal husbandry, of forcing uh, sexual relations between African men and African women with the intent, purpose of breeding for the sake of profit, not for the sake of love, but for the sake of their wealth. So, with that in our background, how can we be sane today? And how have we discovered a resilience that emerges and shatters all the pain that encircled us in this system? I'll stop there. And
Well,
that might not have been the intent of the question, but that's where my head went. So let's start there. Dr. Oliver, I'm passing talking to you. Good morning.
thank you, Brother Al. One of the things that I believe is the fact that we as a people have had to learn how to navigate uh, ourselves within this society. And in my sense, navigating is looking at all the things that have been said. There's a book called Racism and Psychiatry that gives a history of how African Americans have been treated within the United States with regard to mental health. And among the things that happened, there were people who were internationally known as these leaders that dealt with mental health, but knew nothing about working with African Americans. They were European. Even Sigmund Freud was a person that ended up being asked to think about African Americans within the United States when he had no history with them. And the thing that was fascinating to me is because he was identified as an expert, he was supposed to have total knowledge about who we are as a people. One of the things that I have appreciated about African Americans is the fact that even during slavery, we knew what it meant to be a family, despite the fact that they ended up selling off different parts of our group and our family members. We knew what to hold on to and what to aspire to. And even now, when you hear what they're trying to do in Florida in terms of denying and restructuring our reality and talking about how slaves ended up having the benefit of skill building in slavery, and then denying the brutality that occurred, we know what the truth is. And it is what we've attempted to work through in terms of identifying ourselves and then longing for, a reconnection with family in many ways. So I guess the thing that I think about too is the goals of people going into therapy. You know, among the things that I think is important is, and I've seen a lot of programs that deal with African Americans really talk about the challenges of African Americans going into therapy and dealing with the shame and shame meaning and the fact that we may feel like it's not for us, or the belief that it isn't supposed to be for us, and but the fact that African Americans still they still rebuff those notions and also talk about the positive nature of what mental health efforts can do to be able to support us. And among the things that I think about is the fact that I think it depends on what the goal of therapy is for people that uh, go into counseling. You know, and some of it is sort of general with anybody that goes into counseling. Sometimes people are competitive, saying that one of the beliefs is, well, I'm going into this situation for them to fix you because I'm okay. And rather than saying there's something that's going on that's hurting us, and what we need to do is figure out how we can be helped collectively, individually, and collectively. And so when people go in with the philosophy of how they can learn to heal in that environment and to address the issues and challenges that they're facing, that's a good thing, because that means that they're putting both themselves in the process of trying to figure out, how to resolve the issue and conflict that may exist. And when I've seen people who work on those types of things together, I've seen sort of positive consequences that come from that. And positive consequences may also mean that, not everybody's meant to stay together. Sometimes what can be helpful is when people separate or move on. But what happens is that if they learn how to heal themselves or be healed in the process, that is a positive outcome too. So I think it depends on what the goals are of people who enter in. And again, one goal is to be able to resolve different issues, because I think there are things that come up when one goes into counseling. It's to identify the patterns that they see, regularly occurring, or to have the topics surface that a family or an individual may be going through, or a couple may be going through. And once they give themselves to attend to those things, and particularly if you can voice it, and you have the courage to be able to attend to it, that those things can be resolved. So I think if one uh, allows themselves to be connected to the process, that's a really, really good thing. And I think that people can grow and heal in that process. So generally speaking, that's some of my thoughts associated, and I'll have more to say as we continue on.
You're going to pass the talking stick to me or Dr. B?
I'm going to pass the talking stick to Dr. B. I'd be interested in what her thoughts are about some of this stuff.
Okay.
I have a lot of thoughts. And some of them are, I think, somewhat gender specific, in that I think as Black women, we are socialized into certain roles and expectations for us as women, or girls, as mothers or wives. And those roles don't always, what's the word, support our visions for who we want to be. And the empowerment of women in relationships means that we are no longer in a space of subservience, but we are equal partners. And the African tradition long ago really meant a division of labor. Everybody's work was valued and necessary for survival. So when I think of couples today and the struggles they have about how they're supposed to relate, I think a lot of couples may not have models. They may not have parents who were married or parents who stayed together. Their examples in their lives may be divorcees. Their experiences may be a lack of a father or mother in the home, or a place where there's a lot of conflict. And so the way I think that marital counseling and couples overcome is to create their own traditions, create their own rituals around healing and growing and living and loving and changing, that they create their own. And the other piece I've learned after all these years of doing couples work, especially with new couples, is that they learn how to strategically share information. Because what I tell people is, if something happens between you and your spouse, and you go tell your mother and your sister and your best friend, or who are all these 5 or 6 people, they'll still be mad at that person when you've forgiven them. And it will make it extremely difficult in your relationship when you're getting pressured to not forgive and you already have. So one of the things I think makes it difficult is we don't have models. And the models we often do have are on TV, and they're usually white. They don't have the same barriers or expectations or even gifts and talents that we have. And so we look at that as the perfect image of what's supposed to be a healthy Black relationship. And so when I think about slavery and not owning our bodies and having to be a mother who bore many babies that were taken out of your arms, or wet nursing white women's babies when they took your own to sell, There are things like that that I think are conflictual in our existence, and I still see remnants in them today. And I would like to talk a little bit more about that, but I'm gonna pass the talking stick, because when I talk about that, I want to talk about the biology and the transgenerationally passed on behaviors as well as genetics that influence how we are surviving as a Black people today. I really want to get a chance to talk to that about that, but I'll pass the talking stick to you, Brother Al.
I'm going to pass it right back to you, Dr. B, because I really want to hear what you have to say. So I would say let's go right into it. And,
Okay,
and,
well,
and if you permit me, I'll just jump in if I have a question.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
and
then let me.
Dr. Williams, I'm sure will as well. With a comment
Okay,
or question. So let's go. Yeah.
okay. Well, let me just start with this first part. I have my model of what culture is that culture is a learned, shared behavior. And it's passed down from one generation to the next for the purposes of adaptation, growth, and continued life. That's what culture is. It sustains us. So what we learn culturally that may have served us in the past may not be the same behaviors that are serve us in the now or in the future. So we bring those cultural identities, practices, beliefs into relationships where your partner may not have the same beliefs or practices. That's point one. Point two is if a person or a group of people like we have been is traumatized into becoming pregnant and taking babies to term and putting those babies out to be sold on an auction block, or the man is under duress, forced to have sex with multiple partners so that he could breed more Black men and boys to be used as labor. Something happens psychologically and spiritually. Because what happens is you are raising a baby that you know will never be yours again. You're raising a child that may leave you the moment he or she is born. And this procreation pressure that we had so many years, for hundreds of years, was our way of surviving. The more babies you could produce, the more likely you were going to be bred and kept, just like they do horses or cows or other farm animals. In that breeding that says that you can't attach because those babies they're not going to be yours. That breeding mentality, I'm afraid, still exists to some degree when we have brothers who are having multiple partners, multiple babies, and not able to take care of them. It even goes further to those who are. I'm going to talk about somebody like Nick Cannon or Eddie Murphy with 10 kids or 8 or 9 or 10 kids from different mothers, none of whom they are living with. But they are providing for them financially. But being a father is more than a checkbook. And so if we don't have parents who are present, they can't model and teach wellness to our kids. And with that, I'll pass the talking stick to Brother Oliver.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I've seen different ways that men can positively father. And among the things that I've seen are men that adopt kids, but find a way to be able to be engaged with those young people, or that they find ways to be present in the lives of those children. Or you see in faith perspectives, in those churches that end up gathering different youth to be connected and mentored by older men that are in the church. And I think that is a positive thing. Or uncles, or Sonia's nephew, and therefore my nephew, ends up attributing me as being a father figure for him, and that I'm honored by, you know. And then he and Sam are about, I guess about 6 months apart. But it's interesting to me to be connected with them, and also with some of my nephews and nieces and my brothers and sisters that sort of see me as connected. So, but there's also been an interesting thing regarding the issue of adoption with regard to African Americans, that even though times have changed within the last 30 years or so, it used to be that we kept children within our families and we didn't adopt them out. And regardless of what the issue was, if it was something where, there was a child that came out of wedlock, we kept the child and we owned the child. And the child was not illegitimate. The child was legitimate because we loved them, even though there may have been some challenge with, how we as a community may have seen it. We also always seemed like we embraced the children that came out of those circumstances. And I'm sort of pleased and proud about that as well. So, and there are different other things that I think that we've done as a community, even though there had to be able to, again, navigate the challenges. There are different ways that we found a way to navigate those challenges in positive ways that dealt with the realities of our community. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Brother Al. And Al, you mentioned that you had a question, or there's some thoughts that you had, and you're on mute.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver. Not so much a question, but I want to acknowledge, number one, the comments. Brother Mike V, we're trying to send the link out to you, Mike V, because I'd love to have you in person on this conversation. Thank you for following all the time. But you wrote in your note your experience, and he says, I'm chastised for a patriarchy that I'm not a part of, but more a victim. And Black women want a non-heteronormative family rearing with patriarchal, let's see, the next part of that, outcomes that run incongruent within a colonized community. That's a big statement. I'm not sure I fully understand it. I feel it, though. I feel I understand it. And I'm going to ask you, Dr. Oliver and Dr. Williams, to respond to that. That's an observation that kind of capsulizes the difficulty that between a rock and a hard place that we find ourselves because of how we are here and how we, as you described, Dr. Williams, figured out a way to be with each other and for each other, despite a circumstance that denied the value, the validity of our feelings for each other. Dr. Williams?
Yeah, I'm going to do a training for some ministers in Uganda in August. And it's part of some things that I've done in South Africa, and also some themes that I've seen in Kenya. And the thing that's fascinating to me is, things that we have dealt with in terms of our, as an African people, our history and traditions. For example, the issue of role. So women have a role and men have a role. And on the one hand, it can be positive in taking on the role. For example, men are supposed to take on the role of being providers and contributors to the family to make sure that there's shelter, there are resources for the children to explore their desires and identity, and to be able to thrive, supported by the father. But women have a role of being the nurturers and the caretakers within the family. The problem is when you end up having those roles that are so rigid, that what they do is that instead of contributing to something, they prevent something.
Mm.
It's, for example, abuse sometimes is seen as a way to be able to make sure that your family and your house is in order. But when people look at things like in faith texts and looking at ways that things should be identified, what you see is that people end up misusing those guidance, those tools for guidance,
Mm-hmm.
and using them as ways to do damage to the family, to be abusive when the intention wasn't to be abusive. So you see men that may over control and try to go into a circumstance where they get frustrated with someone, and then have them take responsibility for something that perhaps the husband should take responsibility for. And one of the things that we went to Kenya and visited the Maasai tribe, and the men were responsible for the cattle.
Mm-hmm.
But if there was a calf or a piece cattle that got lost, the woman was supposed to find it. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why is she? If he's supposed to take care of the cattle, then why is she responsible for finding it? Or the man builds the structure of the house, but the woman is supposed to seal the house up. And so I guess you can negotiate that. I haven't had a lot of experience with that, nor cattle, but to be able to see situations where you start to divide the responsibility, where you get the benefit and you don't get the challenges with it. There's something that one has to think about in that regard, and not to see that as just a way to be able to control the situation for one's benefit. And some people argue that historically that's the way that things have been, over time. And I think there's something to take a look at with that. But as we think about it and talk about it, we have to be thoughtful about how we're approaching things and doing things to disadvantage someone and to advantage someone else. So one of the things that I talk about is when we look at the consequences of violence within our community, we have to talk about the violence and the abuse that we experience, but we also have to have the ability to be able to talk about the violence and the abuse that we do. And to have one conversation without the other, I think throws it out of balance. And so I guess in my thinking, we have to be able to think about things in balance, and to be able to talk about our strengths and what we do that's useful and helpful, but also think about what we do that's problematic, and that we have to need to learn how to change or grow and be different. And so those are some thoughts associated with that. If you have any more comments about that, let me know, and we'll talk about it.
Let me take the talking stick back and acknowledge the note from Maya Spikes. Maya, thank you for watching and participating and commenting. And she made the note, Dr. B, that your comment, being a father, is more than a checkbook. She said she needs to get that printed on T-shirts and mugs and posted all over the internet. And so she's asking you to say it louder so that the people in the back of the room can hear it too. Maya, thank you so much for the comment. And please add more comments and tell people to comment as well. That's what this is about, is us bringing our voice to it. Well, so let me just move the conversation a little bit, back to the question of the personal nature that of therapy. And I'm wondering, in your experiences as professionals, Dr. B, maybe if you and Dr. Williams would sort of list all the reasons people show up. Why am I asking that? Number one, I'm curious about, what things motivate people to move from inaction to action, action being the decision that we have to show up. And in the context of that, I think Dr. Williams, you talked about the situation where one person thinks the other person needs therapy, but he or she feels like they don't. How
Right.
often does that show up? And finally, this is sort of a continuum type question. Uh, what do you think? How do successful engagements look? What outcomes, as professionals, are you seeking to deliver, and what outcomes are the people that come to you as patients, as people seeking therapy? What are they looking for? And is there often an imbalance?
Mhm.
Do they often know what they're looking for? Are they often able to articulate it beyond not feeling right, beyond feeling that something ain't working, something's not good, and I got to do something different? So, general survey, what's your observation of the work in the realm that you all are operating in the area of couples therapy? Dr. B, I'm going to hand it to you. And
You're on mute.
unmute.
I was saying, thank you. I was going to ask for it too. So I'm glad you gave me a chance to speak. What I was going to say is that when I was learning to work with couples, there are a couple of principles that stood out. Number one is it takes two people to make a couple and only one of them to end it. So there's a congruence and a affinity toward each other to continue in a journey that they may not fully know the outcome for. That's first. The second thing I was going to say is that I have found that couples who explore intimacy on multiple levels tend to stay together longer. And when I say intimacy, I'm thinking about there's about 8 different types of 8 or 10 different types of intimacy. There's an intimacy around child rearing, intimacy around sexuality, intimacy around spirituality, intimacy about work. So if you can share multiple parts of yourself with your partner, then when one thing is out of whack, they still remember and can connect with you on other levels. So the key is about maintaining a connection. And when I see couples, sometimes they're hanging on by a thread and they're just focusing on the negative and they're overlooking the positive in their relationship. And as clinicians, we learn that for every negative thought, the weight of one negative thought is equal to 3 positive ones. So you have to, if you're going to balance out, you have one negative thing, you have to have 3 positive ones to just balance it back out. So focusing on the negative and the problems is not always the place to go. I think it can be and, not either or, but and. So I like to have couples remember why they fell in love in the first place and to recapture that belief in those experiences as a mature couple who's been together for a while. I also find that a lot of couples, when they get together, we have this word we call eros. It's this flaming hot love. It's just fire. And what they think is that when they start a relationship and they're all fluttery and their heart is beating fast and they're just in love, they think that should last forever. And most of us know that burning sensation from the beginning should end up being a warm, cozy fire with someone that you can trust and love and be with. And it doesn't have to be that frantic kind of here we go relationship. And so a lot of people have affairs because they think that when a relationship slows down to a cozy fire instead of a burning, raging fire, they think it's dead or something abnormal about it. But really, the truth is that puts you in a place of not just loving your partner, but liking them. So I think that's a big part of the work that people have to do is love, but also like. And sometimes you can be with someone, you love them and you just don't like them. And that can be a problem. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to uh, to Brother Oliver. So you got the talking stick and you can put your 2 cents in, but I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I absolutely know what you're talking about. And which is an interesting thing when people don't come in. So they may know that something's wrong, but their intent when they go into therapy is for the other person to be fixed because they're fine. And one of the things that I find is when I do think that when you go into therapy, one has to learn how to fix themselves. But the other thing I believe is that there could be a turning point when so you see somebody's pointing at you, you see one finger pointed out, and so you see the other fingers pointing back to yourself. That's the thing that I think is interesting is when people can recognize that you got 3 fingers pointing back at you and they start to look at what issues they bring. That can be a turning point in a relationship, and that people do the work with regard to self-evaluation and also examining what it is that they may need to do to shift the way that they interact and the problems that they may bring to the relationship that they may need to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so working on that understanding, but also that change is something that can be real important. And you really can see things shift in relationships and with people. And that people shift what their intention is for therapy, rather than focusing on. It's been interesting to me listening to men have that conversation, and also couples, men and women, talk about the fact that, well, I'm not going to change until that other person changes. But you have no impact on the person changing. The only person that you have any control over is yourself.
That's right.
And so one of the things that I'll talk about is the fact that, one needs to work on themselves. And if they do the work on doing that, regardless of whether or not they're with that person or they move on to someone else, they'll be bringing the right elements to the same relationship or a new relationship because they're working on the things that they bring that can be problematic in the circumstance. So people really have to, work on themselves in the process, but also try to figure out what ways they can try to do things collectively. It used to be that you would see people have those conversations about the other person needing to change.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they started to reflect on things that they may may bring that's problematic, and it becomes an awakening for them, and then they start doing the work. That's an interesting thing when once these transitions happen and associated with that. Because the focus is on things that they contribute that can be challenging, and they may give less attention to what their partner may bring. Some people don't, but some people do, and that can be something that really helps to shift. And one of the things I noticed too is the fact that if somebody can do that, And if both people are of a mind that they have to work on themselves, that vulnerability may create something that's positive in the relationship. And it's interesting in groups, but also with couples. If you can see issues about people learning to be vulnerable, um, one of the things that can happen is that things can shift because the power uh, dynamics start to change too, and that you don't blame the other person for uh, everything that's problematic. You know, it's interesting when you hear things, hear people say, "Well, it's all you. You're responsible for all the problems in our relationship." And that to me is uh, um, an issue and a challenge, and somebody that's not being self-examining with regard to, you know, what challenges that they may bring. And so,
Let me jump in for the last part of the program and ask you both what self-care means to you. And my therapist tells me, you know, she asks me every time, are you focusing on self-care? And I didn't kind of know what that meant when we started, but now it means for me things like today I was able to report to her that I did a bicycle ride, and I call that self-care.
mhm.
And to get to walk is self-care. To get a pedicure, manicure, self-care, get a haircut, shave at the barber shop.
Yep.
I haven't got much hair to cut. I could do it
I'm
myself,
with you, brother.
but it's more fun to go just to hang out with the barber,
That's
and to be
right.
able to talk and get the guy to trim the beard.
Right.
The value is the time
That's
in that environment more than the actual cut.
mhm.
What about self-care? How important is it? What is it? And how do we talk about it in ways that allow people that didn't have a clue before to get a clue and get busy? And can that be one of the pathways into more of us embracing the value and the healing that therapy can help us experience and attain? Dr. B, I'll pass it to you.
I think self care is critical. Thank you for the talking stick. And the reason it's critical and what it means is that you see yourself within the context of a larger unit, a couple or family or community. And if you take care of yourself, that means that you are available to give to others. When you're when you have given yourself first, the things you need to be healthy and happy and balanced, then you are much more accessible to others instead of serving out of a space of lack or over generosity or overindulgence of other people's needs and desires, because those things not only don't help them, they don't help you, and it breeds resentment.
Mhm.
So I have found that when I see, and there's even research to support it, when I see couples who take care of themselves, they are so much more ready to take care of each other because they feel like they have filled themselves. And I think that's a journey that we all have to struggle. I personally struggle with it because I was raised to believe that women should sacrifice everything till you just have no more, and then you can get what's left over. So having that internal battle of saying, I deserve to be well, I deserve to take this time off, I deserve to get you to bring dinner sometime. All of these things are part of making a healthy couple. And my last tip for couples, I know we're running out of time, is that some years ago, my husband and I decided that we would see our relationship as a team of two. And we decided that every single year we would take either a weekend, long weekend, or a whole week off so that we could repurpose our relationship. We say we're going on a retreat. And we see it as a part of the business. We have goals that we set for each other, whether it be praying together or cooking together or exercising or saving money in all the life areas of wellness. We sit for several days holding hands and crying and praying and talking and making a new plan. And I believe that practice of not only the emotional component of relating, but it's kind of like the business of taking care of yourself and your relationship. I think that is irreplaceable. And I found it to be extremely helpful. So I'm going to pass this on to Brother Oliver, who's been married a whole long time.
Before you do, is there a workbook? Have you got a workbook that says all that? If you don't, we need to make a workbook and sell it.
Okay, I think we better get to making one, because I've got stuff around it. I'm telling you,
Dr.
gold sheets and everything. There you go, Brother Oliver.
Well, one of the things that I value about being in a relationship with Sonia is the fact that not only do I love her, I like her. And because I like her, one of the things that I find interesting with it, and it's important to me, I enjoy doing things with her. We've been together total for almost 40 years. And, but it hasn't seemed like it's been that long. And I remember being in other relationships where it clearly wasn't that long, but it felt like it was. So the thing that and the other thing is the fact that we laugh a lot, and that was something that I appreciated about Sam coming in the world too. We would laugh a lot, with him and about him and things that he would do. There's stories that I could tell you, but I won't. That he would do, and he would say it was one time he ended up, son and I are silly. And so we went into Sam's room when he was a little guy. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. We came into the room, we pretended like he was crying. And so he said, "Sam, what's wrong?" He said, "Got you." But and there are other things that I think are really funny too. But the sort of liking each other and enjoying each other's company is something that's important. When Sam left home, one of the things that I thought was important, when he left home to go to college, Sonia and I had more time with each other, so we had to get reacquainted.
Yes.
And when we got reacquainted, we started to enjoy each other's company, because most of the time we were focused on Sam.
Yeah.
We got to wrap it up there. Look, This is a great conversation. We'll continue this. Let's do it some more. I want to remind people that on July 27th, there's a vaccine event hosted by the Minnesota Department of Health at the CAPI OIC at 5930 Brooklyn Boulevard in Brooklyn Center, 11-3, free, open to the public. We join the health department encouraging all of us to be safe, to get vaccinated, to make sure that we're protected. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane, the Healing Circle. Thanks to Dr. B and Dr. Oliver Williams. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Next week, we'll have our after party.
There we go.
The recovery room. So
Excellent.
Join us.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.